As Israel escalates its bombardment in the Gaza Strip, the rapidly raising death toll in the enclave has now crossed the 5,700 mark. This includes over 2,300 children. More than 700 people have been killed in just the last 24 hours. Civilians continue to pay the humanitarian cost of the war, and aid agencies have cautioned more than 20 times the current deliveries are needed to support the Palestinian population.
We are appealing, we are pleading, we are on our knees asking for that sustained, scaled up, protected humanitarian operation. We appeal to all those in a situation to make a decision or to influence decision makers to give us the humanitarian space to address this human catastrophe.
The aid convoys allowed into Gaza so far have only carried a fraction of what's needed. The United Nations has warned that distribution will have to stop if there's no fuel for the trucks. But fuel has not been sent to Gaza along with the humanitarian aid and is on the brink of running out. The World Health Organization has also called for an immediate ceasefire to allow the safe delivery of health supplies and fuel to Gaza's hospitals.
كما هو معلوم للجميع أقسام العمليات المركزة أقسام العمليات والعنايات المركزة تشتغل جميع أجهزتها بالكهرباء، وإذا تم نفاذ الوقود سنحكم على المرضى الموجودين في أقسام العناية المركزة بالموت المحتم.
The World Health Organization has delivered medicine and health supplies to hospitals in southern Gaza and to the Palestine Red Crescent Society. Turkey has continued to dispatch aid material as well. On Monday, 3 Turkish military cargo planes took medical supplies, including generators, operating room equipment and incubators, to Egypt. Remember, trucks of aid began moving into Gaza from Egypt on Saturday after intense diplomatic efforts, but the agencies say they are still far from enough.
We need the support to be able to respond at scale. What we're seeing now is a very limited access into Gaza. It's a trickle of trucks. Before the crisis, we understand that approximately 465 trucks a day were needed to support the population in Gaza. We're seeing at best 20 trucks a day at the moment. And so with that kind of limitation on the response, we cannot effectively respond to the needs as we see them now.
Half of the enclave's 2.3 million people have been rendered homeless. Over 16,000 people have been wounded and more than 1.4 million Gazans have been internally displaced. Food and clean water is in shockingly short supply. Some people are living on just 1 liter of water a day, others reduced to boiling seawater. Residents are left with no choice but to grapple for resources.
بالنسبة كل مرافق الحياة دمرت للفلسطينيين اللي عايشين تحت القصف تحت النار، وكمان انه النازحين من الشمال على الجنوب زادت تفاقمت المأساة. وهي الناس اللي انت شايف من الفجر الساعة 5 وهم بيستنوا ياخذوا دور على ربطة خبز تكفيش 5 أفراد.
Even after standing in queues for hours, most Palestinians often have to return empty-handed. The United Nations says delivery of aid should be unconditional, but the scaling up of aid seems inevitably linked to Hamas's willingness to free hostages. With a trickle of aid flowing into the besieged Gaza Strip from Egypt, humanitarian staff and diplomats face a web of political, security and logistical obstacles as they try to build up and sustain deliveries of relief. All right, so far it has been 18 days since the militant group Hamas attacked Israel. On that fateful day, the militant group took several hostages with them as they returned to Gaza, and now the pressure is intensifying on Israel to negotiate the release of more than 200 people held by Hamas. Desperate families are begging the officials in Israel to help free their loved ones before an anticipated ground invasion. What we understand now is that Hamas released 2 elderly women who were among the hostages taken when the militant group attacked Kibbutz region. A spokesperson from Hamas mentioned that the two hostages were released following mediation by Qatar and Egypt. The women and their husbands were taken hostage in the attack on their kibbutz home. And before we move on to the next story, we told you earlier that it has been 18 days since the militant group Hamas attacked Israel on that fateful day. The militant group took several hostages with them as they returned to Gaza, and now desperate families are begging the officials to help free their loved ones. Elon Levy is the spokesperson for the Israeli government and former international media advisor to the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, is joining us from Tel Aviv. Elon, welcome to WION World is One, and it's good to see you again.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, reports say up to 50 hostages may soon be handed over. As experts warn, negotiations are probably only way out to secure their freedom. Is that an option for Israel?
We are demanding the immediate and unconditional return of all 220 hostages. In fact, I'll say the number of exact hostages inside the Gaza Strip is still unknown, because when Hamas committed the October 7th massacre, it burned its victims so badly that there are people we don't know whether they were abducted or whether they were simply burned to a crisp. So we're demanding the immediate and unconditional return of all of them. We're talking about children, babies. There are babies just a few months old who are being held hostages by Hamas, elderly people as well, and we're demanding their return, and we're demanding that the international community put more pressure on Hamas. We're demanding that it put pressure on Hamas's supporters, on the countries that are backing Hamas as well, to secure their immediate return, because there is no excuse for abducting a child from its bed and holding it hostage somewhere in a tunnel in the Gaza Strip, and we will do whatever is necessary to bring them back. And I'll tell you one thing about what Israel is doing to bring back the hostages. The Israeli army is offering Palestinians living inside Gaza a financial reward and maximal efforts to protect their security and their safety if they hand over reliable evidence about what is happening to our hostages. You know, we hear a lot that Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinian people, and so we still have a little bit of hope that there are people inside the Gaza Strip who will do the right thing and give us information about the babies who are being held hostage by Hamas, and we're going to do whatever is necessary to bring them home.
Elon, before I move on, I'll just go back to the question that I asked. I said critics say, or experts say, that Israel should negotiate, not demand, but negotiate with Hamas. Is Israel willing to do that?
We're demanding the immediate and unconditional return of the hostages. We're demanding international pressure on Hamas. And in fact, the 4 hostages Hamas has released so far were all released because of this international pressure. Because the world put pressure on Hamas and its supporters to release these hostages, because there is no excuse for keeping babies and old people hostages inside the Gaza Strip. You know, no one called to negotiate with Boko Haram when it abducted 250 girls. No one called for a ceasefire with Boko Haram. These are enemies of humanity. These are enemies of peace. These are enemies of civilization who abducted these people into the Gaza Strip after murdering their families, beheading them, butchering them, torturing them, mutilating them, burning whole families alive. These are not people you negotiate with. This is evil that we will fight, and it is evil we will destroy. And we feel grateful for the international community standing around us in our darkest hour, supporting Israel's duty to defend itself, promising Israel will have everything it needs to defend itself, and making it clear that there is no excuse for the atrocities that Hamas committed, and it's time for Israel to move in, and it's time for Israel to destroy the evil terror organization that committed the October 7th massacre.
Okay, Elon, we heard from the hostages. They said that despite them being bitten with sticks or by sticks, they were treated well by the Hamas militants. They actually say that some of them were even medicated. So why not negotiate with these militants?
Let's talk about what happened. That 85-year-old woman who was released said she went through hell. She said she was beaten with a crowbar, that Hamas terrorists flung her over a motorbike with her head on one side and her legs on the other, that she was kept in a dark tunnel under the Gaza Strip, forced to walk for miles. And by the way, her 85-year-old husband is still there inside the Gaza Strip, with Hamas terrorists holding a gun to his head. And this is after Hamas terrorists destroyed her community, after it butchered and shot everyone they could find, after it tortured 80% of the people in their villages before it murdered them, before it burned them alive, before it shot them. This is a terror organization that has committed mass atrocities, that committed the worst terror attack in world history after 9/11, that killed people with unspeakable brutality, that raped little girls so brutally that it broke their pelvises. I'm sorry for using such extreme language on TV, but this is the truth. This is the truth of what we're fighting against with Hamas, and there can be no way to negotiate or compromise with a terror organization like that.
All right, Elon, finally, and I want your brief response to this one because we are out of time. Is there a message that Hamas is trying to send with their release of hostages? And what's the Israeli intelligence gathering from the hostages, especially now that most of them have described being taken into tunnels?
Hamas released those hostages under international pressure. It's an evil terrorist organization that beheaded, burned, tortured, and raped. It didn't suddenly develop feelings about humanitarianism. It didn't suddenly decide to be nice. It released those hostages because the world is putting pressure on Hamas, because the world is putting pressure on Hamas's supporters, and because Hamas is feeling that pressure. And that pressure is intensifying. And we call on all of Israel's friends around the world, all nations of conscience, to continue to put pressure on Hamas to release all 220 plus of those hostages in the Gaza Strip, because there is no excuse, none at all, for holding them hostage.
All right, I've been talking to Elon Levy. He's the spokesperson for the Israeli government and former international media advisor to the President of Israel, Isaac Herzog. Elon, thank you very much for talking to WION World is One today.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.